January 15th, 2023. Nairobi, Kenya. Sarah Mitchell was 24 years old when she stepped off the plane at Jomo Kenyatta International Airport. She'd graduated from nursing school 8 months earlier with $42,000 in student debt and a fierce desire to make a difference. The position with Hope for Africa Foundation seemed like an answer to prayer. She never imagined that the charity didn't exist. Not really. What Sarah walked into that humid January morning would nearly cost her everything. The organization that promised to bring medical care to rural villages was actually a sophisticated front for something far darker. By the time she understood what was happening, she'd be fighting for her life. The recruitment had started 3 months earlier, in October 2022. Sarah was working double shifts at a hospital in Columbus, Ohio, barely making rent. The job posting appeared on a legitimate nursing careers website. Medical volunteers needed for rural health initiative in East Africa. Room and board provided. Small stipend available. Make a real difference. It seemed perfect, recalled Jennifer Torres, Sarah's roommate at the time. She was exhausted from the hospital work, drowning in debt, and she'd always talked about doing medical mission work. When this opportunity came up, she was so excited. The application process was professional. Sarah filled out forms, submitted her nursing license verification, and provided references. Within a week, she received a video call from Dr. James Omondi, who introduced himself as the founder of Hope for Africa Foundation. He was incredibly charismatic, Sarah would later tell investigators. Well-spoken, educated. He had a British accent mixed with Kenyan inflection. He showed me pictures of clinics, talked about the communities they served. Everything looked legitimate. Dr. Omondi was 51 years old. He wore expensive glasses and tailored shirts. His office background showed medical certificates on the walls and shelves lined with books. He explained that Hope for Africa Foundation operated mobile medical clinics in remote areas outside Nairobi. They needed nurses who could handle basic care, medication distribution, and health education. The salary was modest, but reasonable. $1,500 per month, plus housing in a shared apartment with other volunteers. All medical supplies provided. A 6-month commitment. Sarah's mother, Patricia Mitchell, had reservations. I asked her to research the organization more thoroughly, Patricia said. But Sarah showed me their website. It looked professional. They had photos, testimonials, a physical address in Nairobi. What was I supposed to say? The website did look professional. It featured images of smiling children, rural villages, medical equipment being distributed. There were profiles of other volunteers, though Sarah never thought to verify if these people were real. The charity was registered with the Kenyan government. That registration was legitimate, but the registration process in Kenya wasn't rigorous. Anyone with the right paperwork and fees could establish a nonprofit. What Sarah didn't know was that Dr. James Omondi wasn't a doctor at all. His real name was James Kimani, and he'd been arrested twice in South Africa for fraud. The medical certificates on his wall were forgeries. The clinics in the photographs belonged to other organizations. He'd simply copied their images. But in October 2022, Sarah knew none of this. She signed the contract, booked her flight, and spent December preparing. She got vaccinations, bought supplies, told her friends she was finally doing something meaningful. Her nursing school debt would still be there when she returned, but 6 months of service felt like the right thing to do. She was glowing, remembered Marcus Webb, a friend from nursing school. She kept saying this was what she'd gone into nursing for. Not just working in a hospital, but really helping people who had nothing. She couldn't wait to go. Sarah landed in Nairobi on January 15th at 6:30 in the morning. The air was warm and thick. The airport buzzed with travelers, many carrying enormous bags. She collected her luggage and walked through customs, searching for the driver Dr. Omondi promised would meet her. A man held a sign with her name. He was young, maybe 30, wearing jeans and a polo shirt. "Miss Sarah, I am David. I work for Hope for Africa. Welcome to Kenya." David drove a white van with the foundation's logo painted on the side. He loaded her bags and drove out of the airport, heading into the city. Nairobi sprawled in every direction, a mixture of modern buildings and crowded markets. David made small talk, asking about her flight, pointing out landmarks. "Dr. Omondi is very excited you are here," David said. "We have been needing another nurse. There is much work to do." They drove for 40 minutes, moving through increasingly dense traffic. Sarah watched the city pass outside her window. Street vendors sold fruit and phone cards. Matatus, the colorful minibuses that served as public transport, weaved aggressively through traffic. Everything felt vibrant and overwhelming. The apartment was in a neighborhood called Kilimani. The building was older, but seemed decent. David helped her carry bags up 3 flights of stairs. The apartment had 2 bedrooms, a small living room, and a kitchen with mismatched appliances. "You will share with Rachel," David explained. "She is from Australia. Very nice. She is at the clinic today but will be back tonight." David left her to settle in. Sarah unpacked, showered, and tried to stay awake despite the jet lag. The apartment was basic but clean. Through the window, she could see other apartment buildings, laundry hanging from balconies, children playing in a courtyard below. Rachel arrived that evening. She was 27, blonde, energetic. She'd been in Kenya for 2 months already and seemed to love it. "You're going to have an amazing time," Rachel said. "The work is hard, but it's so rewarding. We're actually making a difference here, not like back home where everything's about insurance and bureaucracy." They talked for hours. Rachel described the mobile clinics, the villages they visited, the grateful families they helped. She showed Sarah photos on her phone. Everything seemed exactly as advertised. What Sarah didn't notice was how tired Rachel looked, how thin she'd gotten, the way her hands shook slightly when she held her phone. Rachel couldn't tell Sarah the truth. Not yet. She was afraid of what would happen if she did. The next morning, David picked them up at 7. They drove north out of the city, the urban sprawl gradually giving way to more rural areas. Dr. Omondi met them at what he called the Coordination Center, a small building on the edge of a larger medical complex. Dr. Omondi greeted Sarah warmly. In person, he was even more impressive than on video. He wore a white coat over his pressed shirt. He spoke passionately about their mission, introducing Sarah to 2 other staff members, both Kenyan men who worked as drivers and equipment handlers. "Today you will observe," Dr. Omondi said. "Learn our procedures. Tomorrow you will begin helping with patient care." They loaded supplies into 2 vans and drove another hour to a rural village. The mobile clinic was set up under a large tree, with folding tables and basic medical equipment. Villagers began arriving, forming a queue. Most were women with children, some elderly men, a few teenagers. Sarah watched Rachel work. She took vital signs, distributed medications, provided basic wound care. The needs were straightforward: antibiotics for infections, anti-malarials, treatment for minor injuries. Dr. Omondi consulted on more complex cases, though Sarah noticed he mostly just prescribed medications without thorough examinations. The day was long and hot. They treated about 60 people. By the time they packed up and drove back to Nairobi, Sarah was exhausted but satisfied. This was what she'd come for. Real medical work with people who desperately needed it. "You did well today," Dr. Omandi told her. "Tomorrow you will do more hands-on work. You have good instincts." For the first week, everything seemed normal. Sarah fell into a routine. Early mornings, long drives, setting up clinics in different villages. The work was challenging but fulfilling. She treated malaria, respiratory infections, parasites, malnutrition. She held babies while Rachel administered vaccines. She taught mothers about hygiene and nutrition. But small things began to feel wrong. Dr. Omandi was rarely present during the actual clinic work. He would appear, speak to a few patients, then disappear for hours. The medical supplies seemed oddly inconsistent. Sometimes they had plenty of certain medications, other times they ran out of basics. And some of the patients who came to the clinics seemed less sick than curious, asking strange questions about the volunteers' backgrounds. Rachel became quieter as the days passed. She stopped making eye contact during conversations. When Sarah asked if she was okay, Rachel just smiled tightly and said she was tired. Something was off with Rachel. Sarah later testified. "I couldn't pinpoint it, but she seemed scared, not just stressed, actually frightened." On January 28th, 2 weeks after Sarah's arrival, everything changed. That morning, Dr. Omandi told them they'd be going to a different location. Not a village, but a private clinic in a more remote area. "We have some patients who need more intensive care," he explained. "This facility has better equipment." They drove for over 2 hours, leaving the main roads for rougher tracks. The landscape became more isolated. Fewer buildings, fewer people. Sarah felt her stomach tighten. This didn't feel like their usual mobile clinic setup. The facility was a concrete building surrounded by a metal fence. There were no signs, no identifying marks. Just a plain structure in the middle of nowhere. "This is where the Foundation does more complex medical procedures," Dr. Omandi said. "Some patients require surgery, and we cannot do that in the villages." Inside, the building was clinical but sparse. White walls, tile floors, the smell of disinfectant. There were several rooms leading off a central corridor. Sarah saw medical equipment, but something about it felt wrong. The layout was strange. Everything was too secretive, too hidden. Dr. Omandi led them to a room where a man lay on a gurney. He was sedated, unconscious. He looked to be in his 20s, thin and malnourished. "This patient needs a kidney removed due to disease," Dr. Omandi said. "I need you both to assist with post-operative care." Sarah's nursing training kicked in. She asked about the patient's medical history, what tests had been done, where the nephrologist was. Dr. Omandi waved away her questions. "Everything is already handled. I just need you to monitor him after the procedure." That's when Sarah saw Rachel's face. Pure terror. "I need to speak with you," Rachel whispered to Sarah. "Alone. Now." They stepped into the corridor. Rachel was shaking. "We need to leave," she said. "Right now. This isn't a real clinic. They're not treating disease, they're harvesting organs." Sarah felt the floor shift beneath her. "What are you talking about?" "I've seen things," Rachel said, her voice barely audible. "Patients who come in healthy and leave with surgical scars, medical records that don't make sense. I think they're targeting poor people, vulnerable people, and taking their organs to sell. Sarah, we're in serious danger." Before Sarah could respond, Dr. Omandi appeared in the doorway. His friendly demeanor had vanished. "Ladies, I need you back in the room. Now." His tone left no room for argument. Sarah felt Rachel grip her arm. They walked back into the room where the unconscious man lay waiting. Sarah's mind raced through possibilities. Maybe Rachel was wrong. Maybe there was an explanation. But then she saw the surgical instruments laid out on the table. Standard nephrectomy equipment. And next to it, coolers marked with biohazard symbols. The kind used for organ transport. Dr. Omondi picked up a clipboard. You will monitor his vital signs during and after the procedure. Standard protocol. The surgeon will arrive shortly. Where are his consent forms? Sarah asked. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. His medical workup? His family? Dr. Omondi's expression hardened. Miss Mitchell, you are here to provide nursing care, not to question medical decisions. This patient has consented to donate a kidney. Everything is legal and proper. But nothing about this was legal or proper. Sarah knew the protocols for live kidney donation. The extensive medical evaluations, the psychological assessments, the verification that donors weren't being coerced or paid. None of that had happened here. I'd like to see the consent paperwork, Sarah said. It's standard procedure. Dr. Omondi set down the clipboard. When he looked at her, his eyes were cold. Miss Mitchell, perhaps you don't understand your situation. You're in a remote location, miles from anywhere. You have no phone signal here. Your passport is in my office safe. You signed a contract. You will fulfill your duties. The threat was clear. Sarah glanced at Rachel, who stood frozen against the wall. This was the moment Rachel had been waiting for. The moment when Sarah would understand what she'd walked into. These people don't donate willingly, Rachel said suddenly. Her voice was loud in the small room. They're told they're getting free medical treatment. They're given drugs, put under anesthesia, and when they wake up, they're missing a kidney. Sometimes worse. Dr. Omondi moved fast. He grabbed Rachel's arm and pulled her toward the door. You've said quite enough. David will take you back to the apartment. Miss Mitchell, you will stay here and assist as instructed. Rachel struggled, but David had appeared in the doorway. He took Rachel by both arms and dragged her out. Sarah heard her shouting as they went down the corridor. Then the shouting stopped abruptly. Sarah was alone with Dr. Omondi and the unconscious patient. You have a choice, Dr. Omondi said. You can be professional and cooperative, or you can be difficult, like your friend. Difficult people often find themselves in unfortunate situations. Do you understand? Sarah understood perfectly. She was trapped. No phone, no passport, no way to contact anyone. She was completely at their mercy. I understand, she said quietly. Good. Now prep the patient. The surgeon arrives in 20 minutes. Dr. Omondi left the room. Sarah heard the door lock behind him. She stood there, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it. The unconscious man on the gurney had no idea what was about to happen to him. She had no idea what had already happened to Rachel. She had to think. She had to find a way out. The room had a single small window, too high and too narrow to climb through. The door was locked from the outside. Medical equipment surrounded her, but nothing that could help her escape. She checked the patient's vitals mechanically, her mind racing. The man on the gurney was deeply sedated, too deeply for someone who'd supposedly consented to surgery. His clothes were in a plastic bag in the corner. She checked them quickly. A worn shirt, cheap pants, no wallet, no ID, nothing. They'd stripped him of his identity before putting him under. Sarah heard voices in the corridor. The surgeon had arrived. The door opened and a woman entered. She was in her 40s, wearing surgical scrubs, carrying a medical bag. She looked at Sarah with flat, evaluating eyes. You're the new nurse, the woman said. American? Yes. Good. Americans know what they're doing. Get in position properly. Lateral decubitus position, right side up. Sarah hesitated. Every instinct screamed at her to refuse, to fight, to do something. But she was locked in a room with two people who clearly had no moral boundaries, and Rachel was somewhere in this building, possibly hurt. She helped position the patient. The surgeon scrubbed in using a basin in the corner. No sterile operating room, no proper protocols. Just a room with a gurney and some equipment. "What's your name?" the surgeon asked. "Sarah." "I'm Dr. Njeri. I've done this procedure 200 times. Very routine. The patient will recover fully. One kidney is sufficient for normal life." The casual way she spoke made Sarah's skin crawl. Dr. Njeri was trying to normalize this, to make it seem like legitimate medical care instead of butchery and theft. "Has he consented?" Sarah asked. Dr. Njeri glanced at her. "He's been compensated. That's all you need to know." Compensated, not consented. The word choice was deliberate. Sarah watched as Dr. Njeri laid out instruments. This was really going to happen. They were going to cut out this man's kidney while Sarah stood there doing nothing. She had to make a decision: cooperate and stay alive, or resist and face whatever had happened to Rachel. The surgery took 90 minutes. Sarah assisted mechanically, her mind detached from what her hands were doing. She monitored vital signs, handed instruments, followed orders. Dr. Njeri worked efficiently, removing the kidney and placing it in a cooler filled with preservation solution. "Blood type O negative," Dr. Njeri said. "Universal donor. This will fetch a good price." The kidney would go to someone wealthy, someone willing to pay $200,000 or more for an organ. Someone who didn't ask questions about where it came from. The man on the table would get nothing. He'd wake up with a surgical wound, minimal pain medication, and no follow-up care. When the surgery ended, Dr. Njeri left with the cooler. Dr. Omandi returned to check Sarah's work. He seemed pleased. "You see? Not so difficult. Just routine medical procedures. You'll get used to it." "What happens to him now?" Sarah asked, looking at the patient. "He recovers here for 2 days. Then we send him home with antibiotics and pain medication. We tell him there were complications with his appendix, that we had to remove it. Most never question it. Most. But some did." Sarah wondered what happened to the ones who asked too many questions. "Where's Rachel?" Resting in another room, she became hysterical. We gave her something to calm her down. Drugged. They drugged Rachel. Sarah felt sick. Dr. Omandi smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "You're more sensible than she was. I can see you understand how things work. You'll do well here. We have 3 more procedures scheduled this week." 3 more. 3 more people would be drugged, cut open, harvested, and Sarah would be forced to help unless she found a way out. Dr. Omandi unlocked the door. "David will take you back to the apartment. Get some rest. We'll bring Rachel back tomorrow. Give her time to calm down." The drive back to Nairobi was silent. David said nothing, just stared at the road. Sarah sat in the back of the van, watching the landscape pass. She tried to memorize landmarks, to note the route, but everything looked the same. Dirt roads, scattered buildings, endless stretches of rural emptiness. Back at the apartment, Sarah was alone. She checked every drawer, every cupboard, looking for Rachel's phone, her passport, anything. They'd taken everything. Her own phone had no signal earlier, but she tried again now. 1 bar. Barely enough. She tried to call her mother, but the call wouldn't connect. She tried texting. The message showed as sending but never confirmed as delivered. She tried the U.S. Embassy emergency line. The call dropped immediately. Sarah deleted the call log and texts, paranoid that they were monitoring somehow. Then she sat on the couch and tried to think. She was in a foreign country, working for criminals, with no documentation and no way to contact anyone. Rachel was drugged and imprisoned somewhere. The patient from today would wake up missing a kidney, probably convinced he'd had an appendectomy. How many others had there been? How many had Rachel witnessed before she finally tried to warn Sarah? That night, Sarah barely slept. Every sound made her jump. She expected David or Dr. Omondi to burst through the door, to drag her back to that facility, to do to her what they'd done to Rachel. Morning came. No one arrived. Sarah waited, terrified and alone. Around noon, David showed up. "Come, Dr. Omondi wants to see you." They drove back to the coordination center, the building where Sarah had first met Dr. Omondi. He was in his office, looking perfectly professional in his white coat and pressed shirt, like none of yesterday had happened. "Sit," he said. Sarah sat. "You did well yesterday. I was impressed by your composure. Many nurses panic their first time. But you stayed focused." "Where's Rachel?" "Still resting. She'll be fine in a few days. The medication we gave her was strong. She became violent, you see. We couldn't have that." Sarah said nothing. Dr. Omondi opened a drawer and pulled out a thick envelope. He slid it across the desk. $5,000, he said. "Consider it a bonus for your cooperation. You'll receive this after each procedure you assist with. 30 operations over 6 months means $150,000, enough to pay off your nursing school debt and have plenty left over." He'd researched her. He knew about her debt, her financial situation. This entire recruitment had been calculated. "What if I refuse?" Sarah asked. Dr. Omondi's expression didn't change. "Then you'll find yourself in a very unfortunate position. You've already assisted with one illegal procedure. You're complicit. The Kenyan authorities would be very interested in an American nurse harvesting organs. You could spend 10 years in Kamiti prison. Or you could take the money, do your job, and go home wealthy." He was right about one thing. She was complicit now. She'd assisted with the surgery. Even though she'd been coerced, even though she'd had no choice, she'd still done it. Any investigation would view her as a participant. "And Rachel?" Sarah asked. Rachel made her choice. She tried to sabotage the operation. She'll remain with us until her contract expires in 4 months. Then she can go home, provided she stays quiet. We have ways of ensuring silence. The threat was clear. Rachel would be kept prisoner for 4 more months. And if Sarah caused trouble, she'd join her. Sarah took the envelope, not because she wanted the money, but because refusing would accomplish nothing. She needed Dr. Omondi to believe she was cooperating. She needed time to figure out a plan. "Smart girl," Dr. Omondi said. "Now go back to the apartment. Rest today. Tomorrow we have a genuine mobile clinic, a real one. We do those regularly, you understand. It provides cover. Makes everything look legitimate. After tomorrow, we have another procedure scheduled." Sarah left with David. Back at the apartment, she hid the envelope of money under her mattress. Then she sat on the couch and tried to think clearly. She needed help. But who could she trust? The local police might be corrupt or paid off. The U.S. Embassy was across the city, and she had no way to get there without alerting David or Dr. Omondi. She needed to contact someone outside Kenya, someone who could pressure authorities from abroad. That evening, Sarah walked to a small shop a few blocks away. She bought a cheap calling card, the kind that gives you international minutes. Back at the apartment, she used the calling card to dial her mother's number. The connection was terrible, crackling and breaking up. "Sarah?" Her mother's voice sounded distant and distorted. "Where are you? We haven't heard from you in 2 weeks." 2 weeks. Had it only been 2 weeks? "Mom, listen carefully. I don't have much time. I'm in trouble. The charity isn't real. They're doing something illegal. I need you to contact the U.S. Embassy in Nairobi. Tell them I'm being held against my will." "What? Sarah, I can't hear you clearly. What's happening?" The line crackled worse. Sarah spoke louder, repeating herself. She gave her mother the name Hope for Africa Foundation, Dr. James Omondi, the address of the coordination center. She tried to describe the remote facility, but realized she didn't know where it was. "Mom, call the embassy. Tell them to find me. Tell them." The call dropped. Sarah tried calling back, but the connection wouldn't go through. She didn't know if her mother had heard enough. She didn't know if help was coming. She walked back to the apartment, constantly looking over her shoulder. If Dr. Omondi found out she'd made that call, she was finished. The next day, they did run a genuine mobile clinic. Sarah treated real patients with real ailments, distributed actual medications, provided legitimate care. It was surreal after yesterday's nightmare. But she understood the purpose now. This was the cover. This was how they maintained the illusion of being a real charity. Some of the patients they treated were legitimately ill, but others, Sarah noticed, were young and healthy. They came for routine checkups, but seemed confused about why they were there. Dr. Omondi spoke to them privately, took their information, sent them away. Sarah wondered if she was watching the recruitment process for future victims. "These procedures you're doing," Sarah said carefully to Dr. Omondi during a quiet moment. "The surgeries. How long has this been going on?" 3 years, he said. "Very successful operation. We've helped over 200 patients receive the organs they needed. Everyone benefits. The donors receive compensation. The recipients get healthy. We provide a service. 200 people harvested like livestock." "What about the volunteers?" Sarah asked. "How many nurses have worked for you?" Dr. Omondi looked at her sharply. "Why do you ask?" "Just curious, wondering if Rachel and I are the only ones." "You're the 8th and 9th, he said. "The others completed their contracts and went home, wealthy and wise enough to stay quiet." Sarah didn't believe that. Some might have completed contracts and stayed quiet out of fear. But others? She suspected some had met worse fates. Rachel had clearly been trying to warn her from the beginning. How many others had tried and failed? That night, back at the apartment, Sarah lay awake planning. She had some money now. If she could get to the embassy, she could explain everything. But getting there meant escaping David's constant supervision. It meant risking that Dr. Omondi would catch her. The next morning, February 1st, David arrived early. "We have a procedure today," he said. "Different location than before." Sarah's stomach dropped. Another surgery, another victim. She got in the van and they drove for hours, taking a route she didn't recognize. This facility was different from the first one. Larger, more like an actual medical center. There were other people around, other staff members Sarah hadn't seen before. This was bigger than she'd realized. This wasn't just Dr. Omondi and a few accomplices. This was a network. The patient that day was a woman, maybe 30 years old, unconscious on the gurney. Sarah was told to prep her for kidney removal. The surgeon was different this time, a man who barely spoke. He removed the kidney efficiently, packed it in a cooler, and left. Dr. Omandi was pleased. See how smoothly everything runs? You're a natural at this, Miss Mitchell. I think we'll get along very well. Sarah wanted to scream. She wanted to grab the nearest instrument and attack him. But violence would accomplish nothing. She'd end up dead or imprisoned, and Rachel would still be trapped somewhere. She had to be smart. She had to wait for the right moment. That moment came 5 days later. On February 6th, Dr. Omandi told Sarah they'd be transporting a donor to a facility near the Tanzanian border. It was a long drive, 6 hours. They'd stay overnight and return the next day. This is a special case, Dr. Omandi explained. Very wealthy recipient, paying premium price. Everything must be perfect. The drive took them south through increasingly remote territory. Sarah watched the landscape, memorizing details. Small towns, gas stations, landmarks. If she was going to escape, it would have to be during this trip. The further from Nairobi, the harder it would be to track her. They stopped at a roadside restaurant for lunch. Sarah excused herself to use the bathroom. There was a payphone outside. She had some of the money Dr. Omandi had given her. She could make a call. But David was watching. He stood near the entrance, smoking a cigarette, his eyes on her. She couldn't risk it. At the facility, the procedure went as before. Another unconscious patient, another kidney removed, another cooler packed with stolen organs. Sarah assisted mechanically, her mind elsewhere. That night, they stayed at a small hotel nearby. Sarah was given her own room, but David was next door. She heard him moving around, heard his TV playing. There was no way to leave without him hearing. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to devise a plan. Tomorrow they'd drive back to Nairobi. 6 hours in a vehicle with Dr. Omandi and David. 6 hours where anything could happen. Morning came. They loaded into the van. Sarah sat in the back, watching the road unroll behind them. They'd been driving for 2 hours when she saw something that made her heart jump. A police checkpoint ahead. Dr. Omandi saw it too. He tensed, but kept driving. Say nothing, he told Sarah. We are a medical charity returning from a community health initiative. That is all. They pulled up to the checkpoint. The 2 Kenyan police officers approached the van. One checked Dr. Omandi's documents while the other walked around the vehicle. He looked in the back windows where Sarah sat. This was her chance. Her only chance. Help me, Sarah said through the window. I'm being held against my will. I'm an American citizen. Please help me. The officer's expression didn't change. He walked to the front of the van and spoke to his partner in Swahili. Dr. Omandi said something, pulled out his wallet, handed over some bills. The officers nodded. They waved the van through. Sarah felt her last hope die. That was foolish, Dr. Omandi said coldly. Those officers are on our payroll. They know about our operation. Trying that again would be very unwise. The police were paid off. There was no one to help her. Sarah slumped in her seat, fighting back tears. She was completely alone. They arrived back in Nairobi that evening. Dr. Omandi told David to take Sarah back to the apartment. We'll have a conversation tomorrow about your behavior at the checkpoint, he said. You need to understand there's no escape. The sooner you accept that, the easier this will be. At the apartment, Sarah finally broke down. She sobbed until she had no tears left. Then she sat in the dark, thinking about Rachel, about the patients she'd seen harvested, about her own complicity in all of it. She couldn't keep doing this. She couldn't assist with more surgeries, couldn't watch more victims be carved up for profit. But she also couldn't see a way out. The next morning, she made a decision. She would find Rachel. Whatever happened, they'd face it together. Two of them had a better chance than one alone. When David arrived, Sarah told him she wanted to see Rachel. "I need to know she's okay. Please, just let me talk to her." David hesitated, then made a phone call. After a brief conversation in Swahili, he nodded. "Dr. Omondi says you can see her. 15 minutes only." They drove to the coordination center. David led Sarah through the building to a back room. He unlocked the door. Inside, Rachel lay on a cot, staring at the wall. She looked terrible, thin, pale, her eyes hollow. "Rachel?" Sarah said softly. Rachel turned. When she saw Sarah, her eyes filled with tears. "I'm sorry," she whispered. I tried to warn you sooner. I tried." Sarah knelt beside the cot. David stood in the doorway, watching. "It's okay. We're going to get out of this." "How?" "They have everything. Our passports, our phones. They're watching us constantly. And the police are involved. Sarah, there's no way out." "There has to be. We just need to think." Rachel grabbed Sarah's arm. Her grip was weak but desperate. "They've been drugging me. Something that makes me confused, makes it hard to think. Sarah, I don't know how much longer I can hold on." "Time's up," David said from the doorway. Sarah stood. "I'll come back. I'll figure something out. Just hold on." Rachel nodded, but Sarah could see she'd lost hope. David locked the door behind them and led Sarah back outside. Over the next week, Sarah assisted with 3 more procedures. Each time she looked for opportunities to escape. Each time there were none. The facilities were remote. David or another guard was always present. The victims were always unconscious by the time Sarah saw them. She counted 19 total patients that she'd assisted with now. 19 people missing kidneys. 19 families wondering why their son or daughter came back from a free medical treatment with mysterious surgical wounds. The money Dr. Omondi gave her accumulated under her mattress. $30,000. Blood money. Sarah couldn't bring herself to count it or even look at it. On February 14th, Valentine's Day, everything changed again. Sarah was at the apartment when David arrived, looking agitated. "Get your things. We're moving you." "Why?" Questions being asked. "Someone contacted the embassy about Hope for Africa Foundation. We need to relocate operations temporarily." Sarah's heart leaped. Her mother had gotten through. Help was coming. But David's next words crushed that hope. "We're moving you to a secure location. Somewhere no one will find you. You and Rachel both. Until this passes." A secure location meant a prison. Somewhere even more remote and isolated. If they moved her now, no one would ever track her down. David grabbed her arm. "Let's go. Now." Sarah pulled away. "I need to pack my things." "No time. Move." He dragged her toward the door. Sarah's mind raced. If she went with him now, she was finished. This was it, her last chance to resist. She yanked her arm free and ran, not toward the door, but toward the kitchen. She grabbed a knife from the drawer and spun around. David was right behind her. "Put that down," he said. "Stay back." David lunged for her. Sarah slashed with the knife. She didn't mean to hurt him, just to create distance. But the blade caught his arm, cutting deep. Blood sprayed across the kitchen. David shouted and stumbled backward. Sarah ran. Out the door, down the stairs, into the street. She heard David shouting behind her, but she didn't look back. She ran through the neighborhood, dodging people, looking for somewhere safe. She saw a matatu stopped at a corner. She jumped aboard just as it pulled away. The other passengers stared at her. An American woman, covered in blood that wasn't her own, wild-eyed and terrified. "U.S. Embassy." Sarah gasped. "Please, can this take me to the U.S. Embassy?" The driver looked at her in the mirror. He said something in Swahili to the other passengers. Then he nodded and changed direction. The embassy was on United Nations Avenue. The matatu dropped Sarah a block away. She ran to the gates, barely registering the guards, the security checkpoint. She was screaming before she even reached the entrance. "I'm an American citizen. I need help. They're going to kill me." The Marine guards at the gate moved quickly. They brought her inside, into a secure room. Someone gave her water. Someone else called for medical staff. Sarah tried to explain, but the words came out jumbled, frantic. "Organ trafficking, Hope for Africa Foundation, James Omondi. They're harvesting people. They have another girl, Rachel, Australian. You have to help her. You have to stop them." A consular officer arrived. She was calm, professional. She took notes while Sarah talked. She called the Kenyan authorities. Within an hour, police arrived. Not the local police, but detectives from a specialized unit. "We've been investigating reports about this organization," one detective told Sarah. "We've had rumors, but no evidence. Can you take us to these facilities?" Sarah tried to describe the locations, but she didn't know exact addresses. She described the routes, the landmarks she'd memorized, the coordination center address she knew. That would be a start. The police moved fast. Within 3 hours, they'd raided the coordination center. Dr. Omondi was arrested. David was found at a hospital getting his arm stitched. Rachel was found in that locked room, barely conscious from days of sedation. Over the next 24 hours, the full scope of the operation emerged. The remote facilities were raided. 3 surgeons arrested, 8 other staff members taken into custody. Medical records were seized, showing 216 illegal organ harvests over 3 years. Names of wealthy recipients in Europe, Asia, and the Middle East who'd paid for kidneys without asking where they came from. Sarah spent 2 days at the embassy giving statements. Rachel was hospitalized for dehydration and drug withdrawal. The 2 women finally had a chance to talk properly, to share what they'd endured. "I tried so many times to get help," Rachel said. Her voice was hoarse, her eyes still hollow. "But they watched me constantly. When I tried to warn you that day at the facility, I thought they'd kill us both." "Why didn't you refuse from the beginning?" Sarah asked. "I didn't know at first. For the first month, everything seemed legitimate. By the time I understood what was happening, I was already trapped. They took my passport, my phone. They told me if I caused trouble, they'd make me disappear, that I'd be blamed for the operations, that I'd spend the rest of my life in a Kenyan prison. It was the same playbook they'd used on Sarah. Isolation, coercion, threats, and enough money to make cooperation seem rational. The international media picked up the story within days. American nurse exposes Kenyan organ trafficking ring. The headlines focused on Sarah's escape, on her courage in coming forward. But Sarah didn't feel courageous. She felt complicit, guilty, stained by what she'd witnessed and participated in. The legal aftermath was complex. Sarah and Rachel were granted immunity in exchange for their testimony. They spent 3 weeks in Nairobi giving depositions, working with prosecutors, identifying victims. Then, they were allowed to go home. Sarah landed in Columbus on March 15th, exactly 2 months after she'd left. Her mother met her at the airport. They held each other and cried in the arrivals hall while other travelers moved around them. "I'm so sorry," Patricia said. "If I'd pushed harder for you to research the organization, if I'd insisted you not go." "It's not your fault," Sarah said. "They were professionals. Everything looked legitimate." The trial of James Kimani, the man who'd called himself Dr. Omondi, began in September 2023. Sarah testified via video link. She described the procedures she'd assisted with, the facilities, the victims she'd seen. Kimani was convicted of human trafficking, assault, and multiple counts of causing grievous bodily harm. He was sentenced to 35 years in Comiti prison. The 3 surgeons received similar sentences. David and the other staff members got shorter terms, between 5 and 15 years, depending on their level of involvement. The investigation identified 147 victims. Not all 216 people listed in the medical records could be found. Some had died from surgical complications. Others had disappeared. But 147 survivors were located and offered medical monitoring and compensation. None of the wealthy organ recipients were prosecuted. Most lived in countries with weak extradition laws. Others had powerful connections. The organs had been transplanted years earlier. There was no way to reverse what had been done. These cases are always like this, explained Detective Julius Mwangi of the Kenya Directional Criminal Investigation Unit. We can catch the harvesters, but the buyers remain untouchable. The demand for organs far exceeds legal supply. As long as that remains true, these operations will continue. Sarah returned to nursing, but she couldn't work in a hospital. Too many memories, too many triggers. She took a job at a community health clinic instead, focusing on preventive care and patient education. She started speaking at nursing schools about her experience, warning students about international volunteer scams. These traffickers specifically target idealistic young professionals, Sarah told audiences. They look for people with medical training, people with debt, people who want to make a difference. They exploit your goodness. Always research thoroughly. Verify organizations through multiple independent sources. And if something feels wrong, trust that instinct immediately. Rachel had a harder recovery. The drugs they'd given her caused lasting effects. Memory problems, anxiety, depression. She couldn't return to nursing. Last Sarah heard, she was working in retail in Melbourne, trying to rebuild her life. The 2 women stayed in contact, texting occasionally. Neither wanted to dwell on what had happened, but they needed someone who understood. Someone who'd been there. In June 2024, a year and a half after her escape, Sarah received a letter from Kenya. It was from one of the survivors, a young man named Joseph who'd been told his appendix had been removed, but later discovered he'd lost a kidney. The investigation had helped him understand what had happened. He wanted to thank Sarah for coming forward, for stopping the operation before more people were hurt. Your bravery saved lives, Joseph wrote, including mine. I live now knowing someone stole part of me, but I also live knowing that others will not face the same fate. Thank you for having the courage to run. Sarah kept that letter. On difficult days, when the guilt became overwhelming, when she wondered if she should have resisted sooner or fought harder, she read Joseph's words. She reminded herself that escaping and speaking out had mattered, that bringing down the operation had saved future victims. The organ trade continues. In Kenya and across East Africa, traffickers still operate. The World Health Organization estimates 10,000 organs are illegally harvested globally each year. Young people still disappear. Families still wonder why their children came back from free medical clinics with mysterious scars. But Hope for Africa Foundation is gone. The facilities have been shut down. James Kimani sits in prison. And Sarah Mitchell tells her story whenever she can, hoping to prevent even one person from walking into the same trap she did. On that January morning in 2023, When Sarah stepped off the plane in Nairobi, she believed she was going to help people. In a terrible way she did, just not in the way she'd imagined.